You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and if you hear something different today, you are very, very astute, as I got a new cable for my microphone. I'm no longer recording off a video camera, so it's back to the way it was. I like this a lot more. It's a little more professional. I mean, there's really no excuse to record just audio on a video camera. I kept the lens cap on, quite honestly. But I like having that as a backup. It was 2 weeks that I had to use the video camera. And one of those days was garbage. The audio was garbage, and if there wasn't any big sports news to talk about, I wouldn't have posted it. But there was, so I had to post it. Then when I started using the mixer, it went a lot better. So I really like having that backup method, because cables can break, microphones can break, a million things can happen. I'm really glad that I have that backup system in place. But I do like recording with this kind of a microphone better. It's a lot more professional. There are a couple really sad deaths in the football world that I need to talk about. I'm not going to talk about Max Turk. There's really not much I can say about him. I mean, he only played one game in the NFL. He was good at USC, but he wasn't great. I really can't talk too much about him. I'm sorry he died. My sincerest condolences to his family. But I just can't talk about him in depth. But I can talk about Bill Groman in depth. And if you're an old school AFL fan, you will know that name. Because Bill Groman, in the early part of the AFL's lifespan, was one of the best receivers there. In fact, he was one of the best wide receivers in all of football. He was with the AFL in its first year, 1960, where he played for the Houston Oilers. Immediately, Groman burst onto the scene to lead the AFL in receiving yards, yards per catch, and yards per game for a receiver. He also led the AFL in total scrimmage yards that year. He had 1,473 receiving yards that year, and 12 touchdowns. The 1,473 receiving yards are the most ever by a rookie wide receiver in any league. AFL, NFL, doesn't matter. For whatever it's worth, the man who holds that record in the NFL is Anquan Boldin, who in 2003 caught 101 passes for 1,377 yards and 8 touchdowns. The thing that makes Groman's record that much more impressive is the AFL only played 14 games. He had 2 less games to accumulate receiving yards, and he still has put up more receiving yards than any other rookie ever. Unreal. The 1960 Oilers won the AFL championship that year by beating the Chargers 24-16. After the season, Groman made the first team All-AFL team from the Sporting News. The year after that, Groman kept his great play up. His catches went down, his receiving yards went down, but his yards per catch went up, and his touchdowns went up. Groman caught 50 passes that year for 1,175 yards. That equates to a 23.5 yards per reception total. He also had 17 touchdowns that year. If you combine the 2 touchdown totals, 12 in his rookie year, 17 in his sophomore year, that's 29. That's the most touchdowns that any wide receiver has had in his first 2 seasons playing professional football. In 61, the Oilers got off to a slow start. Lou Rimkus went 1-3-1. He was replaced by Wally Lem. Lem was undefeated. The Oilers went on to the AFC title game again, where they narrowly beat the San Diego Chargers by a score of 10-3. Unfortunately for Groman, and history has kind of lost why this happened, he fell off a cliff really fast. In 62, Lem wasn't retained by the Oilers. It was Pop Ivy who was the coach. Ivy was a solid coach for the Oilers. Went 11-3. The Oilers made it back to the AFC title game. The AFL title game. But they lost 20-17 to the Texans in the greatest game in AFL history. Groman that year was an afterthought in the passing game, and I'm not sure why. Like I said, history has lost that. Groman only caught 21 passes that year for 328 yards and 3 touchdowns. The year after that, Groman went to a dismal Broncos team. No one played well on that team. Not even Billy Joe, who would later go to the Jets and win Super Bowl III. After that, he actually became a coach at a couple historically black schools. Just an interesting fact there. I shouldn't say that no one played well for that team. Lionel Taylor had 1,100 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns. That's a good season by any metric. And he led the AFL in catches that year with 78. Alright, he had a good year. But Groman didn't. Groman only caught 27 passes for 437 yards and 3 touchdowns. He went to the Buffalo Bills. The Bills, at that point in time, were knocking on the door of taking that next step. They had back-to-back 7-6-1 records under Lou Saban. And you could tell that they were building up to something. Groman's first year there, and I'm not going to say it was due to Bill Groman, it wasn't. But Groman's first year there, the Bills went 12-2, had the best offense in the AFL and the best defense in the AFL. And they beat the Chargers 20-7 in the AFL title game. Interesting fact, the kicker for the Bills, Pete Gogolak, former New York Giant, has the most points in Giants history. But Groman was an afterthought. He only caught 4 passes that whole year. The year after that, the Bills slightly regressed. They went 10-3-1. They still had the best defense in the AFL, but only the third best offense. It was enough, though, for the Bills to make it back to the AFL title game, and they destroyed the Chargers in that game, 23-0. Interesting fact about that game, the Bills' offense only accounted for 1 touchdown. In the second quarter, Jack Kemp threw an 18-yard touchdown to Ernie Warlick. But after that, it was all the defense and special teams. Butch Bird had a punt return for a touchdown, and Pete Gogolak kicked 3 field goals. Not too often you can win a championship game when your offense only scores 1 touchdown. But that year, Groman was non-existent. Literally non-existent. He played in 5 games. He didn't catch a pass. He did get a ring, though, and he retired with 4 AFL championships to his name. He's the only man ever to win 4 AFL titles. I'd love to say why Groman fell off so much. Unfortunately, I don't have that answer. But for the first 2 years of the AFL's existence, he was probably the best wide receiver in the league. And if you win 4 titles, you're doing something right. Whether you're just a good guy to have in the locker room or you're producing. In the case of Groman, it was probably that he was a good guy in the locker room. But Groman was an integral part of the AFL's history. May he rest in peace. The second guy who I want to talk about is Jim Kiick. One of the most important players on the 72 Dolphins, the undefeated team. Him and Larry Zonka were known as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid because they were wild childs. But you know what? If you're a great player, you can put up with that. And, well, I'm not going to say Kiick was a great player. He was a really, really good player. He was drafted in the 5th round by the Miami Dolphins when they were in the AFL. He was drafted because of his quick feet, according to Joe Thomas, who was their director of player personnel. Thank you, Wikipedia. And Kiick, similar to Groman, in his first 2 years, dominated. His rookie year, he made a Pro Bowl. The year after that, made another Pro Bowl while leading the AFL in touchdowns with 9. It was during those 2 years that Zonka and Kiick were at their best sharing the Dolphins' running back position. It was really 1A, 1B. It was a platoon setup before platoon setups were really in vogue. And They carried that over to the NFL in 1970. Don Shula took over as head coach. I don't know if I mentioned that when I did my tribute to him, but Don Shula was actually the first coach of the Miami Dolphins when they were in the NFL. There was still that 1A, 1B setup, but Zonka was pulling away with the job, and in 71, he really pulled away with it. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I want to talk about the type of player Kiick was. He was a very versatile player. The best way to describe the type of player Kiick was would be Jonathan Stewart with better pass catching ability. Jonathan Stewart, great pass blocker, could run really, really well. Not a great pass catcher. Kiick was that way too, but he was a much better pass catcher. In Kiick's first 4 years with the Dolphins, he had over 1,000 scrimmage yards. In 1968, Kiick was the Dolphins' second leading receiver. In 1970, Kiick was in the top 15 in receptions and rushing yardage in the whole league while leading the Dolphins in receiving. In 71, he was in the top 15 again and was second in receiving for the Dolphins. He was versatile before being versatile was a thing. He was a clutch player. He was a tough player. He was the kind of guy who, when the Dolphins needed to move the chains, they just let Kiick do his thing. In 71 and 72, Kiick was a really, really good playoff performer. Just go and look at some of the box scores. I mean, Kiick was an integral part of a lot of those games. In 72, the perfect season, Don Shula decided that a faster running back would be a better complement to Zonka. So they transitioned Kiick to more of a fullback type role. And Mercury Morris became Zonka's backup. Zonka and Morris both rushed for 1,000 yards. They combined for 18 touchdowns. It was the right decision, but it didn't sit well with Kiick. And it really didn't sit well with Zonka either. Again, they were Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. They were best friends on the field and off the field. There's a picture of the two of them posing in Western attire. They were on the cover of Sports Illustrated with Larry Zonka flipping the bird. After the 1973 season, and I know I'm jumping around a lot, but that's really the only way I can tell you about his career. Kiick and Zonka published a book that exposed in great detail their contentious relationship with Don Shula. Kiick went off about Morris usurping him. And you could tell that they were unhappy. that anger culminated in 1975 when Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Kiick and Zonka, brought Paul Warfield with them to the Memphis Southmen of the WFL. The three of them signed contracts totaling $3.5 million, which at the time was insane, especially when you factor in the fact that the WFL was just in its second year. The three of them also got a luxury car every year, or at least they would have, and they got a 3-bedroom luxury apartment. That I didn't know. So, thank you, Wikipedia, again. Kiick played well for the Southmen, but the WFL folded before it could finish its second season. So the three of them went back to the NFL, but for different teams. Paul Warfield ended up with the Cleveland Browns, where he started his career. Larry Zonka went to the New York Giants. Kiick wanted to join him, but Bill Arnsparger, former Giants coach, bad coach for the Giants, former Dolphins defensive coordinator, didn't want Kiick because he was afraid that Kiick would be a bad influence on Zonka. So Kiick was forced to go to the Denver Broncos. And he didn't really do much there. He finished his career the year after that, 1977, where he played for the Broncos and the Redskins. He had been sick for a while. In 2017, he developed dementia, was living in a home, and he died from Alzheimer's disease at the age of 73. Kiick was a wild child before being a wild child was accepted. Again, there was no tandem in the NFL that was like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. May he rest in peace. Alright, no trifecta today because I'm not going to do this day in sports history, but I am going to recap the Philadelphia Eagles draft class and give you the correct Detroit Red Wings Mount Rushmore. I'll start with the Eagles. Here we go. The Eagles had a terrible draft. There's really no other way to say it. I'll just get right into it. To take Jalen Reagor at 21 overall, when you have guys like Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins, and Michael Pittman still available, is nothing short of criminal. I had Reagor as the 53rd best prospect in this draft. ESPN agreed with me. This is a guy with some of the worst ball skills in the draft and really didn't play well at TCU. He's more of a potential guy because you like his frame, 5'10 and a half, 206 pounds. He has good speed. He can break plays for big yardage. And he's a durable player, but for a team that is desperate for wide receivers, for a team that had Greg Ward starting meaningful games for them last year, all due respect to Greg Ward, but he shouldn't be starting meaningful games. To take Reagor was criminal. And then they followed that up with one of the stupidest picks in the draft. I mean, the Rieger pick, you can sort of kind of defend in the sense of the Eagles really needed a wide receiver. If this is the guy who they had as the best wide receiver on the board, take him. And I understand that logic. I disagree with it, but I understand the logic. But to take Jalen Hurts in the second round, when you have Carson Wentz, when you have doubled down on Carson Wentz, by giving him a massive extension, is criminal. Again, I mean, there should have been arrest warrants issued for Howie Roseman. Zach Bourne would have made perfect sense. Christian Fulton would have made sense. Even another wide receiver, Denzel Mims, would have made sense. Instead, the Eagles take Jalen Hurts? Jalen freaking Hurts? I don't even understand the plan here. How are you going to deploy him? In a Wildcat role? Can Hurts develop into a decent player in the NFL? Yeah, he played really well at Oklahoma. I give him credit. Alright, he overcame a lot of adversity to ball out at Oklahoma. Alright, good for him. But you had so many bigger needs. And it's a slap in the face to your franchise quarterback to take this guy. This isn't something like Aaron Rodgers being old, so you take Jordan Love. That's acceptable in a weird, roundabout way. It wasn't the right pick, but you can understand the logic. You cannot understand the logic behind this pick. This was one of the worst picks in the draft. Period. It's not even worth going through the other picks. Because the Eagles tanked their draft right away. I mean, I will go through the other picks, but oh man. Their first two picks were brutal. And quite honestly, their third pick wasn't much better. Davion Taylor was a guy who I had a late 4th round grade on. The Eagles needed a linebacker. I understand the pick, but they reached for him a lot. Taylor's not a smart player. He's not good in one-on-one battles. He only had 1 sack last year at Colorado. He's a good kid, comes from a good home, good frame. He can play 3 downs. He's good in pass coverage. I understand the logic behind it. I don't love the pick. I don't hate the pick. Because I like Taylor as a person. It's a good story. He comes from a religious home. He's a Seventh-day Adventist. They celebrate the Sabbath on Saturdays like Jews do. So he really didn't want to play on Saturdays, but he got his mother's blessing. So he was able to play. It's a great story. I like the kid. I hope he works out. It was just a reach. Kayvon Wallace filled a need for the Eagles in the secondary. But there were better players available than him. I mean, this is a guy who I had a 7th round grade on. I just don't see a high ceiling for him. High floor, can turn into a solid player, a 5 to 10 year player, which I've gotten some heat for saying. I've gotten some heat for saying that these guys are borderline undraftable, or they're 7th round prospects, or stuff like that when I say that they're 5 to 10 year players, potentially. That's if everything goes right. Realize it's more likely that if I have a 7th round grade on someone, or if I have them as undraftable, that means I don't think they're going to work out. That's best case scenario I'm laying out. I thought that was self-explanatory. I guess not. Look, Wallace is a jack of all trades, master of none. He doesn't do anything terribly. He doesn't do anything great. It was a huge reach to take him in the 4th round. Again, I had a 7th round grade on him. I like that he was a captain at Clemson. And it's possible he's around for a while, but I just don't see a lot of room for growth there. Jack Driscoll was really the first pick the Eagles made that I really, really liked. Has some really good tape, 4-year starter, fantastic athleticism. I mean, he rivals a guy like Jedrick Wills in terms of athleticism. The thing is, though, he has short arms, short hands, not the toughest player in the world, not the strongest player in the world. I think Doug Peterson can work with him, though. Driscoll's a guy who's going to need a very specific system to succeed in this league. I think Peterson's going to work with him and try to develop him into a solid offensive lineman. I really like the pick. For a league that's going extremely heavy on athletic offensive linemen, can't do much better than Driscoll. The Eagles picked 3 wide receivers in this draft. I usually don't like it when teams take multiple players at the same position, but I can excuse it in this case. The thing is, though, John Hightower was a 7th round prospect to me. He's just a weird player. He's just an inconsistent player. Some plays you're amazed with his speed. His big play ability is off the charts. But there are other plays where he just blanks and he drops easy passes. He had a good year at Boise State last year, but you just see things in his game that you don't want to see. There are some plays that he looks really fast. There are other plays where he's struggling to get open. He's just really weird. He has a good frame. It's possible he can work out. He's just bizarre. He's just a weird player. He was too much of an enigma for me to rank any higher than a 7th rounder. I mean, it's possible Peterson can develop him, but for a team that really needed wide receivers that are immediately going to be able to come in and make a big impact, that's not John Hightower. I did not like that pick. Sean Bradley made a ton of sense. The Eagles needed linebackers. They took an edge rusher in Taylor, so take an inside linebacker in Bradley. I get that. That makes sense. Bradley has a really good frame, played well at Temple last year. Really good against the run. Not a good pass rusher. And he's not great in coverage. He's okay in coverage. It's something he can work on. He's not a lost cause there. But what really knocked him down my board is the fact that he is a bad pass rusher. I had a 6th round grade on him. I don't think he can play 3 downs, but it made sense for the Eagles. They needed a linebacker. They needed multiple linebackers, really. I like the pick. Quez Watkins dominated at Southern Mississippi. Caught 64 passes for over 1,100 yards. Only 6 touchdowns, which I don't like, but the receiving yards jump off the page. He ran a 4.35 40 at the Combine, the 3rd fastest at the Combine for any position. His big playability is off the charts. He's a home run hitter. Really good frame, 6 foot, 185 pounds. His ball skills are okay. They're not great. They're not terrible. I had a late 4th round grade on Watkins. To get him in the 6th round was great. That pick made a ton of sense. And assuming the NFL plays this year, which I think they will, but it's still up in the air. But assuming they play, I think Watkins is going to be an immediate contributor for the Eagles. I also think that Prince Tega Wanogho is going to be an immediate contributor for the Eagles. I had a 3rd round grade on this guy. ESPN had him as the 91st best prospect in this draft. How on God's earth did he almost slip out of the 6th round? The Eagles picked him with the 31st pick in the 6th round. I mean, that's unreal. I understand that he's not ready to start right away. He's a developmental prospect. I get that. And I understand that he's not a sure thing, but this is a guy who, when you watch him play at Auburn, you could see it. He has the tools to succeed. He just needs the right coaching. For any team that was going to take Wanogho, all you have to do is just work with him for a year, and you've got a great player for the foreseeable future. I think Wanogho has one of the highest ceilings in this draft. And that includes the first rounders. I think Wanogho's a guy who can be a perennial Pro Bowler. Jack of all trades, master of none. His pass blocking's really good. His run blocking isn't where it needs to be. Again, developmental prospect. But just watch him play at Auburn. He holds his own. This is a guy with not a lot of football experience. Went into the SEC and dominated. I think this guy has a sky-high ceiling. Great pick for the Eagles. That made a ton of sense. Casey Toohill was an undraftable prospect until the Combine. 4'6", 40. Solid arms. Solid hands. Good frame. Not a great frame. You'll want to like him if you're a scout, but when you watch him play at Stanford, it's just not there. He's terrible against the run. He's not bad against the pass, but it needs work. He's not the smartest player in the world, but he can play multiple positions. Again, he's a scout's dream. I had a 7th round grade on him. It made sense to take him. It's going to be interesting to see if he works out. If he's developed properly, maybe we'll see him for a while. If not, he's going to flame out. All in all, it's impossible to really like what the Eagles did here. The first 2 picks just killed their draft, in my opinion. And even after that, I didn't love the Taylor pick. I didn't really like the Wallace pick. I didn't like the Hightower pick. They had a good 6th round with Bradley, Watkins, and Wanogho. But it's hard to give this draft anything better than a C. And even then, that feels generous. The only reason why I'm giving him a C is just because I think the players they took are good players. You know, I don't think they took any surefire busts. Rieger will have a solid career. Taylor will have a solid career. Wallace will probably have a solid career. There were just better ways for the Eagles to use those picks. Unfortunately for them, they didn't do it. Alright, it's time for another Mount Rushmore. Is it okay to keep doing this because we're tearing down statues of Teddy Roosevelt and George Washington? There are actually some people on Twitter that are going after Mount Rushmore. Oh, it's unfair to Native Americans. It signifies colonialism and imperialism. I mean, come on. For God's sake. How about you be proud of the people who made this country what it is? I got news for you. No country's history is perfect. But you don't see their citizens tearing down statues of their own presidents. Confederate statues, I understand, and I support 100%. People like Washington, Jefferson, Grant, Roosevelt, no. That I don't like. If I offend those people by still doing Mount Rushmores, quite honestly, I don't care. The correct Mount Rushmore is Gordie Howe, Steve Yzerman, Terry Sawchuk, and Nicholas Lidstrom. Do you really need me to say anything about these guys? I mean, I'll rattle through them really fast. Gordie Howe, Mr. Hockey, second best player in NHL history. Some people still have him ahead of Gretzky. They shouldn't, but Gordie Howe was the best player of his era by far, not even close. Incredibly nice man. I did meet him, met his sons. Really, really classy. Just a classy individual through and through. Steve Yzerman was the best player on 3 Red Wings Stanley Cup winning teams. Doesn't get much better than that. I mean, this guy was one of the best players in all of hockey in his era. And now he's tasked with leading the Red Wings back to dominance as their GM or president of hockey operations, whatever his title is. I wish him luck. Terry Sawchuk is kind of interesting. He used to hold the record for most shutouts in NHL history by a goalie, 103. For a long time, it was viewed as an unbreakable record. Then Brodeur came in. The reason why I say he's interesting is because the Hockey News a few years ago published a list of the 100 best goalies of all time. Number 1 was Sawchuk, and Stan Fischler wrote the article. I have a million stories about him, but this isn't the right time. Used to work for him. I don't understand how you can look at a guy like Sawchuk. All due respect to Sawchuk, alright? Great player. Elite player. Hall of Famer. But how can you look at Sawchuk and say he's better than Brodeur, Patrick Waugh, even Jacques Plante I'd put ahead of Sawchuk? I mean, Sawchuk was an elite player, probably the best goalie of his era, 4-time Vezina winner, 4-time Stanley Cup winner, won a Calder Trophy, 7-time All-Star. I get it. Fantastic player. Not the best goalie of all time. Doesn't even get an Olympic medal. He's the 4th best goalie of all time. And Nicholas Lidstrom, for a lot of his career, was probably the best defenseman in the game. Him and Sergei Fedorov really started the trend of the Red Wings looking to Europe to find their players, and for a long time it paid off. Datsuk, Zetterberg, Franzen, Holmstrom. Those guys all had great careers for the Red Wings. Fedorov and Lindstrom helped start it. The reason why I put Lidstrom ahead of Fedorov was because Lidstrom has 7 more years with the Red Wings than Fedorov does, and he has a little under 200 more points than Fedorov as a Red Wing. But I'll tell you, there are a bunch of guys that I left off that you could have made an argument for. You could have made an argument for Fedorov. You could have made an argument for Datsuk. You could have made an argument for Zetterberg. Chris Osgood, Alex Delvecchio, Norm Ullman, Ted Lindsay, Brendan Shanahan. I mean, you name it. This was a really tough Mount Rushmore to come up with. I mean, I'll tell you, we could make a second Mount Rushmore, and that Mount Rushmore would be better than a lot of other teams' first Mount Rushmore. I'll tell you that. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying, Happy belated Father's Day.